He did not resist when they shackled him. With his left hand, he still tried to cross himself, but he could not. The skin was bursting at the joints, and his palms were oozing pus. At his feet lay the mask that had been removed from the heretic and iron mask with a nail driven through the mouth. Charles the Bold, Emperor of West Francia, was no longer a ruler, but a body, swollen, hot, moaning. He was led back into the hall under guard, leaving a brownish-black trail of blood on the bench. He continued to burn, sign, and point, no longer noticing how behind his back, disguised doctors and deacon servants were taking wax impressions and passing them to neighboring tents. They knew he would not last long, but he still held the pen. In the spring of 1866, the first outbreak of the plague appeared in Lyon. 8 days later, there were 11 dead, 5 of them with ulcers in their groins, blue spots on their necks, wheezing, and black tongues. The disease came from the south. Like everything else at that time, spices, heretics, mercenaries. The emperor had already been living for 6 months in the monastery of Saint Marcel, which had been turned into a military headquarters and a court of law. He rarely left, except for executions, which took place 3 times a week. Most of those burned were women, often pregnant. The charges were monotonous: witchcraft, talking to spirits, and keeping strange herbs. Confessions were obtained through interrogation with water, red-hot rods, and strangulation. The emperor personally approved the practice of sacred immersion, holding the victim's head in vats of vinegar for a long time until they told everything. A servant who wrote at the court left a record. His face was blackened by the heat that day. His eyes were red, his legs were bandaged, and he was breathing through a cloth soaked in alcohol. He executed 6 and said he would burn 100. Even then, Charles was ill. Doctors described unrelenting fever, dark urine, heaviness in the side. The reports of the monk Hildebert contain the phrase, "The emperor sleeps sitting up," for when he lies down, he suffocates from the heat and fluid. His groin and armpits were covered in sores, but they were hidden. The emperor forbade anyone to discuss his condition, and his physician Bertrand, who uttered the word plague aloud, was excommunicated and imprisoned in a dungeon. All this took place against a backdrop of intensifying persecution. In April, more than 50 people were burned, mainly from Arles, Avignon, and the vicinity of Toulouse. Almost all of them were heretics from among the poor, artisans, and wandering monks. One of them, mentioned in Judge Godin's records, cursed Charles on the stake. "You will die like a pig, rotting, chained, forgotten." The next day, the emperor began vomiting blood. Medical assistance was limited to washing him with vinegar, powder from a unicorn's horn, and smoke from burning juniper. They performed bloodletting through his ankles and neck, after which he lost consciousness, but asked for it to be repeated. Ointments made from rat fat, sulfur, and crushed pomegranate peels were rubbed into his groin and back. All this was accompanied by daily prayers with cries of repentance, which the emperor wrote down on parchment and ordered to be read over the heretics before their death. He believed that by burning the heresy of others, he would purify his own flesh. But the flesh was not purified. By May, he had lost more than 10 kilograms. His hands were shaking, his tongue was swollen, and he had difficulty swallowing. His groin glands swelled and began to fester. He was transferred to a separate ward and locked up. Only 2 monks were allowed in, his confessor and an old doctor named Ghislain, who later disappeared. Rumor has it that he was strangled for daring to say he must be taken away from the living. From that moment on, Charles did not get up. He was placed in a chair secured with straps, where he spent all his time. He lost consciousness, moaned, screamed, and sometimes whispered children's prayers. One of the guards later wrote, he spoke to his mother, who had died 50 years ago. He asked for milk, claiming that it was poisoned. He ordered that the heads of invisible enemies be cut off. Candles burned constantly in the room, not for prayer, but because of the smell. The skin on his neck and under his armpits began to peel off. Fluid oozed from the sores, seeping onto the floor and leaving stains. Meanwhile, the political situation was deteriorating. Formerly loyal vassals began to refuse to come to court. In Paris, riots broke out over delays in bread deliveries. The German electors distanced themselves from their alliances with Charles. Ambassadors from Burgundy left the court. Even the papal legate, who had previously been close to the emperor, did not appear from the day he read the report of the outbreak of disease at court. The servants who were allowed to attend him began to disappear. One died of a black spot on the heart, as stated in the conclusion of Arnulf's brother. 2 others fled. Only one woman remained, an old woman from Besançon who did not speak. She was kept with him until the end. In the 6th week of his illness, Charles lost consciousness of what was happening. He continued to wave his hand as if signing decrees, while pus dripped from his open wounds onto the parchment. He spoke in dead languages, demanded that all silver be burned and that he be fed only fish. A constant stench reigned in the room, so strong that even the soldier left to guard the door stood with a rag over his nose. An autopsy later revealed that his lungs had rotted away, completely filled with pus. His liver had almost dissolved, his gallbladder had burst. Ulcers covered the inside of his thighs, his perineum, and his chest. That same night, one of his former advisors, Archdeacon Boson, ordered the doors to be locked and no one to be allowed in except the confessor. This decision was political. Behind the doors, power was already being divided. 3 pretenders to the throne, Charles's nephews, his grandson, and his illegitimate son, each supported by a different clan, began to form their own troops. Some of the nobility left Lyon. 2 days after his isolation, Charles gasped for breath for the last time. His eyes clouded over, his tongue fell out, and his hands were seized by convulsions. He died, defecating on himself, his face covered in blue spots. His body did not cool for 2 days. Decay had already begun while he was still alive. During the autopsy, the skin peeled off in layers. It was impossible to embalm the body. The tissue crumbled in their hands. A coffin was welded together from tin and covered with resin. It was closed without a funeral service. This was the first time an emperor had died without a crowned successor at his side. It caused chaos. Military skirmishes broke out for control of the territories. Cities that had once been loyal to Charlemagne rebelled. The church distanced itself from everything that was happening, calling Charlemagne's death a sign of purifying fire. His name was removed from the list of prayers. No one living wanted to be buried next to him. After the funeral, a power struggle began. His body was not yet cold in its coffin when 3 pretenders began to gather troops. The first was Adalbert, Duke of Burgundy, who concentrated his forces in Besançon. The second was Bishop Ludovic, Charles's illegitimate son, who had the support of the clergy of Reims. The third was the young Louis of Lorraine, the recognized grandson, who arrived with 200 spearmen from Arras. The old nobility, previously directly subordinate to the emperor, adopted a wait-and-see attitude. The chief officials, the treasurer, 2 secretaries, and the commander of the guard fled, taking with them the seals, part of the treasury, and documents. Charles's chambers were empty. The room where he died was boarded up. But according to reports from Archdeacon Thibault, moans and smells could be heard in the building at night. Servants sent to clean up refused to enter. A week later, the premises were cleaned with lime and sulfur under the supervision of priests performing a purification ritual. Materials relating to the last months of Charles's life began to disappear. Interrogation records, correspondence, and orders vanished from the archives. Meanwhile, the plague spread north. In 40 days, 28 villages were completely deserted. In Paris, the dead were buried in mass graves. The number of burnings decreased, as there were no survivors or guilty parties left in the houses. The inquisitor from Rouen wrote, "The plague that cleansed the heretics is now eating its judges." Charles's funeral became a formality. The coffin was not opened. No vestments were worn. The funeral service lasted less than half an hour. 9 people were present, 3 of whom were simple monks. The location of the grave was kept secret for a long time. Only 2 decades later did the chroniclers of the monastery of Saint-Marcel mention, "He was buried among the bones, like a cursed man." A military clash between Charles' heirs took place in the 4th week after his death. More than 300 people were killed in the Battle of Melun. Louis of Lorraine was captured and beheaded. Duke Adalbert died of fever before seeing victory. Ludovico, supported by the clergy, was recognized as ruler but not crowned. The papal throne was vacant at the time. The plague reached Rome. The Curia fled. No one placed a crown on his head. In all the chronicles of that time, both secular and ecclesiastical, Charlemagne's name was accompanied by clarifications. Without a funeral service, died of decay, excommunicated on his deathbed. No church included him in the list of the worthy. There was no pilgrimage to his tomb. Instead of relics, there was horror. Stories spread from mouth to mouth about how his corpse had decomposed while he was still alive, how blackness covered his skin, how he spoke to shadows and ordered the voices in the corner to be burned. One of the later records, made by the priest Gauthier de Meaux, reads, "It is not his body that has decayed, but his kingdom. With him, confidence, faith, and power have disappeared. Fear and stench remain." It is believed that this is why the church temporarily abandoned cremation as a symbol, disgraced by the death of the executioner. Many of Charles' laws were repealed. The archives from his reign were partially destroyed. It was as if history itself wanted to forget him. The official cause of Charles the Bald's death in posthumous documents was listed as exhaustion due to fever, but the surviving doctors spoke of bubonum nigrato, black plague caused by internal decay. His liver was filled with pus. His brain showed signs of decay. His bones were soft, like those of a baby. His genitals were covered in ulcers. His face was unrecognizable even after death. The servant who identified the body said, "He is no longer human." This marked the end of Charlemagne's reign. His death ushered in a new, chaotic, lawless period when each city decided for itself who would rule it. Priests no longer dared to point the finger at the guilty. Anyone could be infected. The empire collapsed. Within a year of his death, it lost 2/3 of its territory. Central authority disappeared. The throne remained empty for more than 5 years. In the memory of the people, Charlemagne remained a rotten ruler, emperor of sores, and black judge. Not a single coin bearing his profile remained in circulation. His face was erased from frescoes. His image evoked not fear, but disgust. Even decades later, his name was not preceded by the great, but only by the sick, the lonely, and the crownless. He did not die of illness, but of his own belief in fire. He burned the heresy of others, hoping to purify himself. And he died, rotten, forgotten, surrounded by ashes, and these ashes fell on Europe like a shroud.